Hey everyone! In this video, we'll be learning about Python data types. And specifically, we'll be learning about how to work with textual data. And textual data in Python are represented by strings. To display text in Python, we use the print function. Let's start by printing something on the screen. Print hello world. Now, this line here is using the print function. And we're passing this text value into that print function. If you run this, you'll see that it prints hello world in the console. Now, if we wanted to create a variable that holds that text value, then we can just create a variable. For instance, we create message, and we'll set that message variable equals to our text value that we passed into print. And here, message is our variable name. So if you're coming from another language, then you might be wondering if we need to use semicolons or something like that to end each line. But Python doesn't need that. It operates on white space alone, which makes it a very clean language to work with. Now, by convention, our variables are usually all lowercase. And if it's multiple words, then we separate those with underscore. So if instead my variable name was my message, then it would be my underscore message. So that's just a convention that's commonly used. And also these variable names should be as descriptive as possible as to what values they're meant to hold. Message is a good variable name here, because it's holding our message. But if I was instead to call this variable m, which is a valid variable name, but anyone reading my code now would know when they see this m variable what value it's supposed to hold. So message is a much better variable name in this case. This message variable now holds our text data, and our text data is called a string. Now we can use our variable in place of this string anywhere that we use it in our program. So instead of printing out hello world directly here, I'm instead going to now print out this variable. And that should give us the same result. So if I run that, then you can see down here, we still get the same result. Now we can see that I created this string with single quotes. Now, you can also use double quotes. So if you're wondering if there's a difference between the single quotes and the double quotes, then it really just depends on what text you have in your string. So for example, if you have a single quote in your string, so for example, let's create one with a single quote. Instead of hello world, I will instead make our string Benjamin's world. Now see, the problem here is that Python sees this single quote within our text as being the end of the string, and it's not going to know what to do with what comes after that single quote here, because it thinks that's where the string is closing. So if you run this now, then you'll get an error. Now there's a couple of different ways to handle this. We could escape this single quote with a backslash. So if I escape that single quote and now run this, now Python knows that this single quote doesn't close out the string, and that instead, this one should. Now, another way to handle that is, so I'll take away that escape character. Now, another way to handle that is to instead just use double quotes on the outside of our string. So if we know that our string contains a single quote, then we can instead use double quotes on the outside. And then it'll know that that single quote isn't the end of the string. Now, if we run this, then we can see that it still works fine. But that doesn't necessarily mean that double quotes are better because it goes both ways. If your string contains double quotes in the message, then I would use single quotes on the outside. Now, if we needed to create a multi-line string, then one way we can do this is by using 3 quotes at the beginning and end of our string. And these can also be single or double quotes as well. So let's go ahead and look at an example. So I'll add 3 quotes to the beginning and end of our string here. And now I'll just add some text to span some multiple lines here. So I'll just say, was peaceful, and then hit enter to go to a new line, and say, until Mingo arrived. So now if we run that, then we can see that it printed out our string correctly over multiple lines. Okay, so let's go back to our simple hello world example. So I'm just going to take all of that and replace it with our previous hello world example. And now let's go ahead and just run that really quick. So we're back to our starting point. So we can think of our string as a string of individual characters, and we can access these individual characters also. So first, let's see how we can find how many characters are in our string. So to do this, we can use the len function, which stands for length. So whenever I print out here, if I was instead of printing my message, if I was to print out this length function and pass in message, run this. Now we're no longer printing out our message. We're printing out the length of our message. And we can see that it says that the length of our string is 11. And if we counted these up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, notice that the space between hello and world is also counted as a character, making the total length 11. Remember, in Python, everything inside the quotes counts as part of the string, including spaces, punctuation, and any special characters. And we can access our string's characters individually. So to do this, we can use the square brackets after our string and pass in the location of the character that we want. So I'll say print message and then square brackets. Now the location is called an index and it starts out as 0. So to access the first character of our string, we can say print message index of 0. So if we print that, then we can see that we got the capital H. Now, since the length of our string is 11, that means that with the first character starting out at 0, our last character would be at index 10. So it's our total length minus 1. So if I was to say print out the location at index 10, the value of index 10, then we can see that we got our D character, which is the last character in that string. Now, if you accidentally try to access an index that doesn't exist, then you'll get an index error. So if we were to say access the index of 11, then we can see that threw an index error. Now, we can also access a range of characters. So if I just want to get the word hello from our string, then we could say that we want 0 and then this :5. So the first index here is our starting point. And the second index, which is separated by this colon, is the stopping point. Now, one thing a little confusing about this is that the first index is inclusive, which means it's going to include that value, but the second index is not. Now, there's good reasons for this, but it's still easy to forget. So basically what we're saying is I want all the characters between the beginning and up to, but not including the 5th index. And it'll be more clear if we just go ahead and run this. So we can see that it prints out hello. So it printed out our message from the 0 index here, all the way up to, but not including the 5th index here. Now, since our starting point here is just the first index, we can actually just leave that off, and it'll assume that we want to start at the beginning. So if we don't put anything there and then :5, then we should get the same thing. So if we run that, we can see we still got hello. Now instead, if we wanted to grab the word world from the string, then we could start at the 6th index, and then we can just go to the end. And just like leaving off our starting index, leaving off the stop index just goes all the way to the end. So now if we run that, then we can see that it gives us back word world. Now, what we're doing here is called slicing. And if you'd like to dive deeper into it, I'll be covering it in more detail in an upcoming video. So now let's just go back to printing out our message and let me run this. Okay, so all of the data types that we're going to review are going to have certain methods available to us that give us access to a lot of useful functionality. Now, when I say methods, a lot of people wonder, what's the difference between a method and a function? And functions and methods are basically the same thing. A method is just a function that belongs to an object. It's not important to get into the details of that now, but if you hear me say method or function, then you can basically think of those as the same thing for now. So like I was saying, the data types that we'll be going over all have certain methods available to us that give us access to a lot of useful functionality. So let's look at some of these string methods. So we can see here that our hello world text is capitalized, but let's say that we wanted that to be all lowercase. Now to do this, it's just as easy as saying print message, and then to lowercase this, we can say dot lower. Now, when we run this dot lower with these parentheses here, that's running the lower method on the string. So when we ran that, we can see that now our hello world has been set to all lowercase. And if we wanted to do this to uppercase, then it's as easy as changing that lower to upper. If we run that, now we can see that hello world is all uppercase. So now let's say that we want to count a certain number of characters in our string. And to do that, we can use the count method. And the count method actually takes a string as an argument. So we can say message.count. And now we have to pass in an argument, and it has to know what we want to count in our message. So for now, we'll just say count hello. And if we run that, we can see that it returns that the string hello appears in our message one time. But if we instead just pass in a single character as our argument, so I'll pass in an L, if I run that, you can see that we get a 3 because there are 3 L in our message variable. So if we instead want to find the index of where certain characters can be found, then we can use the find method. So if you come up here and instead of saying dot count, I can say dot find. And now this takes an argument as well. It's what we want to find. So let me type in world here and run this. And we can see that it returns a 6. And that's because world starts at the 6th index of our message variable. Now, if we try to find a string of characters that doesn't exist, then it will just return -1. So if instead of world, I typed in universe and ran that, you can see it returns a negative one because it can't find that anywhere in our message variable. Okay, so now let's say that we want to replace some characters in our string with some other characters, and we can do this with the replace method. Now, first I'm going to change this back to printing out our regular message, so I'll just delete these. Now let's try to use our replace method right below where we first set our message variable. And this method takes two arguments. First, it takes what we want to replace. So first, let me just say message.replace. So first it takes what we want to replace. So let's say that we want to replace world. And now the second argument, which is separated by a comma, is what we want to replace world with. So we'll replace world with universe. So now if we run this, then this might be a little unexpected. We can see that it's still printing out hello world. Now the reason our replacement didn't work is because it's not making that replacement in place. It's actually returning a new string with those values replaced. And we'll learn more about return statements when we learn about functions. But basically, we need to set a new variable here to get that return string with those replacements. So I could say something like new message is equal to that original method with this replacement. And instead print that new message and run that. Then you can see that now it replaced world with universe. And if you really wanted to make the replacement to the message variable, then instead of making a new message variable, then we can just set this same message variable again. So now we're setting the same message variable equal to that replacement and then printing it out. So if I run that, then we can see that now the message variable had world replaced with universe. And this may look a little strange to set a variable to an altered version of itself, but it's very common and you'll be using that a lot. Okay, so now let's get rid of this replace line here. And now let's look at how we can add multiple strings and concatenate them together. So instead of saying hello world, I'm instead just going to set this equal to hello. And instead of calling this message, I'm going to set this equal to greeting. And just below greeting, I'm going to create a variable called name, and I'm going to set that equal to Steve. And now lastly, let's create a message here. And we want this message to combine our greeting with our name. We want to say, hello, Steve. And one way to do this is to use the plus sign operator. So we could try this by saying greeting plus name. Now, if we run this, and we can see that it's not exactly what we wanted. It combined them together, but it doesn't have a space there. So when you're concatenating strings together, it's easy to make mistakes like this. So what we want to do is add a string between them that spaces them out. So we can add a string between these just by putting in a string literal here. And I'm also going to put in a comma and a space to separate those. And now we also need another plus sign so that we're adding the name after that string. So now we're saying that we want this greeting, which is hello, plus this comma and space, plus the name. So if I run this, then we can see that it concatenated those strings together how we wanted. Now, sometimes using the plus sign isn't the best way to go. If we wanted to create a longer, more complicated string while using our variables, then adding them all together like this might get hard to keep track of. So let's say that we wanted to add to the end of our message just by, closing off a sentence and saying, welcome. So to do that, after our name variable, we could add another string that is period to close off that sentence, a space, and then welcome with an exclamation point. So let's go ahead and run that. Now we can see that it printed out the string, how we wanted it to look. But it's starting to get a little complicated on this line here to keep track of all of our plus signs and spaces within our message. Instead, with strings like this, it's usually better to use a formatted string. This allows us to write the sentence as it will appear and put placeholders in place of our variables. So let's go ahead and see what this would look like. So to instead use a formatted string, we can say message is equal to, and we're just going to write it exactly how it appears, except everywhere where we want to replace with a variable. We're going to put in a placeholder, and those placeholders are going to be these curly brackets. So we want a placeholder for the greeting, and then a comma, a space, then a placeholder for the name, then a period, and then we'll type out welcome and an exclamation point. And now to fill those placeholders with our variables, we can say dot format and pass in greeting for the first placeholder and then name for the second placeholder. So now let's go ahead and delete this line where we were using the plus sign operator. So if we run this, we can see that we got the same thing as when we concatenated them together. At this point, you might think this is easier than concatenation. However, dot formatting can get more confusing as you start using more variables. For example, let's say we have 4 variables. Name equals to Ben, place equals to East Blue, food equals to meat, and fear equals to water. If you want a statement like, hey, my name is Ben, I'm from East Blue, I love meat and I'm afraid of water. This is how you can do it in dot format method. Hey, my name is curly brackets, I'm from curly brackets, I love curly brackets, and I'm afraid of curly brackets. Then dot format and pass the variables. Name, comma, place, comma, food, comma, fear. Print message. Now run the code. It's done. But this can be tricky. The longer the statement, the more likely you are to misplace variables, like accidentally putting food in place of place. Tracking all the positions of the variables in the curly braces can be confusing. This is exactly where our superhero, the F string, comes to the rescue. With F strings, you can directly reference variables in line without worrying about matching their positions. Just add an F, open the quotes, and start writing your statement. Hey, my name is, and when you need to insert the variable, just open curly brackets and place the variable inside. That's it. I'm from place, I love food, and I'm afraid of fear. Print that new message. Now run it. See how simple it is, making it much easier to write and read complex strings. I always use F strings because they're so straightforward and efficient. No matter how many variables or how long the string is, F strings never get confusing. So if I wanted the name in all caps for some reason, then I could just come into the placeholder here and say name.upper. If I run that, then you can see that now the name was capitalized. Okay, so we're almost finished up, but I wanted to show you one last trick here when you're learning something new in Python. So we saw a lot of different methods that we could use on our strings. Now, if we ever wanted to see everything that's available to us, then there are a couple of things that we can do. So first we can use this dir function, and that looks like this. And what this does is, if we pass in a variable, then it will show us all of the attributes and methods that we have access to with that variable. Now, don't worry about all of these double underscore methods yet. But if we look down here, then we'll see a couple of familiar methods that we used in this video. So for example, we have dot upper here. We have dot lower, dot replace. So this kind of gives you a broad overview of all the attributes and methods that are available to you. Now, this doesn't show what any of these actually do. So to see more information about these string methods, then we can use the help function. But if we run this help function on the name, then that won't work. We actually need to run it on the string class itself. So we'll just type in help and then str for string. And if I run that, then we can see that this gives us a lot more information. And I'll pull this up here a bit. So it, tells us everything that's available to us. And if I scroll down here a bit, and if I try to find something that we actually use in this video, okay, so we have find here. So you can see that it actually gives us a description of what these methods do and what arguments they take. Now, if you know that you had a certain method available to you, but you couldn't remember exactly what it does, then you can actually pass it directly into help also. So if I wanted to find out some more information about the lower method, then we could say string.lower. And if we run that, then we can see that it gives us information and the description just of what lower does. So using that dir function and that help function is a great way to get a broad overview of the methods and attributes that are available to you. And also, what using the help function gives you an idea of what those methods do without actually going online and checking everything there. Okay, so I think that is going to do it for this video. Before we wrap up, here's an additional tip about comments in Python. Comments are a great way to add notes or explanations in your code for reference, and they are especially helpful for beginners. To make a comment, just put a hashtag at the beginning of the line, and whatever you type after it will be ignored by Python as code. Now, run the code. See, the comment doesn't affect the code at all. It's just a comment. The interpreter will skip over it, not considering it as part of the code. And it's not just for beginners. Imagine you're working on a project with thousands of lines of code. If you haven't left comments explaining what certain blocks of code do, you might forget why you wrote them when you come back after a month. So in our example, you could add comments like hashtag dot formatting method over here and hashtag fstring method over here to clearly explain what each part of the code is doing. But that's not all. Comments can also be used to temporarily disable code. If there's a line you don't need to run at the moment, just add a hashtag in front of it, and it will be treated as a comment, not as code. When you need that code back, just remove the hashtag. You don't even have to manually add hashtags by moving your cursor to the beginning of each line. There's a shortcut. Just place your cursor anywhere in the line and press Control key plus question mark key. This will add the hashtag and turn the line into a comment. To uncomment it, do the same. Control plus question mark. This works for multiple lines too. Select the lines, press Control plus question mark, and the entire block will be commented or uncommented. Commenting is one of the most necessary things in coding, helping you and others who might read your code understand its purpose. It's a small habit with a big impact on readability and maintainability. I hope that now you feel comfortable with working with strings and are familiar with some of the useful things that we can do with those. In the next video, we'll be learning how to work with numbers in Python, and specifically integers and floats. But if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer those. If you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. And also, it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching. Happy coding!